Hey, Pastor Steve Waldron. I found a great website, michelleblake.com. It has a lot of great quotes about the King James Version. So the first one I want to read today is by Winston Churchill. So let's get started. In the crowded immigrant ships that sailed to the New World of America, there was little room for baggage. If the adventurers took books with them, they took the Bible, Shakespeare, and like Pilgrim's Progress. And the Bible they mostly took with them was the authorized version of King James I. About 90 million copies are thought to have been published in the English language alone. Now we know that's, I think, over 1 billion now. It has been translated into more than 760 tongues. Because they didn't have Hebrew and Greek helps, they would just translate the Bible, the KJV. The authorized version is still the most popular in England and in the United States. This may be deemed James' greatest achievement, for the impulse was largely his. The Scottish pedant built better than he knew. The scholars who produced this masterpiece are mostly unknown and unremembered, but they forge an enduring link, literary and religious, between the English-speaking peoples of the world. The New World Encyclopedia says this about the KJV. The general effect of the King James Version was to influence writers in their model of writing. Beforehand, authors generally wrote as scholars addressing an audience of other scholars, as few ordinary peasants were literate at the time. The King James Version is meant for dissemination among the ordinary man, to be read by preachers to their congregations, could not afford the luxury of using such a technique. The simpler, more direct style used by the translators of King James Version so influenced authors that their prose began to address the reader as if he or she was an ordinary person instead of a scholar, thus helping create the idea of the general reader. Think about it, changed the course of history. Raymond Barber said this: every verse, chapter, and book is inspired, inerrant, impeccable, irrefutable, indestructible, invincible. It is powerful, perfect, priceless, pure, productive, and preserved for us in our own language in the 1611 King James Bible. Alistair McGrath, in his book In the Beginning, great theologian, in popular Christian culture, the King James translation is seen to possess a dignity and authority that modern translations somehow fail to convey. The King James Bible retains its place as a literary and religious classic by which all others continue to be judged. Dave Sorensen, he's got some good books out. Sword of the Lord, I think, carries some of his. In the greater perspective of history, it should be apparent that God was involved in every step of the preparation, purifying, and publishing of the King James Bible. God certainly knew in advance the widespread distribution and influence KJV would have. To the contrary, it would seem that God so ordained it. There can be no other conclusion except that God had a direct and providential hand in the development and propagation of the most widely used version of His Word in human history. Really, no doubt about that. Also, author Cleveland Cox, amazing literary stylist, person, teacher from the UK, Oxford, Cambridge type area, 1857. He said, can it be necessary to argue that no one can inflict a graver wound on the unity of a race and on all the sacred interests which depend on that unity under God than by tampering with the English Bible? By the acclamation of the universe, it's the most faultless version of the Scriptures that ever existed in any tongue. Now notice how all these learned men, because I've done a couple of these videos reading quotes, have come to the same conclusion. It's the best. To complain of its trifling blemishes, to complain of the sun for its spots, whatever may be its faults, they are less evil in every way than would be the evil sure to arise from any attempt to eradicate them. And where there is so much wheat, the few tares may be allowed to stand till the end of the world. 2 centuries complete have identified even its slightest peculiarities with the whole literature, poetry, prose, and science, as well as with the entire thought and theology of those ages, and the time to all appearance is forever past, that any alteration can be made in it without a shock to 1,000 holy things and to the pious sensibilities of millions. Boy, that's right. David B Lockran says this: the authorized King James Version, on the other hand, is the inspired, preserved, infallible Word of God for today, just as it's been for generations of Protestants for nearly 400 years. John Wesley said this book had to be written by one of three people: good men, bad men, or God. It couldn't have been written by good men because they said it was inspired by the revelation of God. Good men don't lie and deceive. Couldn't have been written by bad men because bad men don't write something that would condemn themselves. It leaves only one conclusion: it was given by divine inspiration of God. And then Alexander McClure, just wonderful. Whoever attempts to shake the confidence of common people in the common version, the KJV, puts their faith in imminent peril and of shipwreck. The best fruits of Christianity have sprung from the seeds of our translation as scattered. One last one. Literary editor of the English Standard Version, Leland Ryken, says, until relatively recently, the King James Version was what people meant when they spoke of the Bible. Wherever we dip into the sermons and writings of the famous preachers and theologians, English-speaking world, it's obvious at once they use the KJV. Jonathan Edwards, Spurgeon, Whitefield, Moody, Henry, Billy Graham all used the King James Version and did not need to tell their audience what translation they were using. And I would say Haywood and Urshan and Pugh and Kilgore, and the list goes on. Glass, Ballestero. God bless you. We love you. Thanks for being here. Join us daily. Read that word. Fall in love with it. Bye-bye.